we're going to start by looking at the sketch for a few seconds and then doing this. And this is a scribble where we're feeling like we are the horse and the rider. We're making that jump with them, and we're feeling where the weight is, where the weight has been thrown off, where the tension is, where the movement is, and the energy. We're just capturing it in this little crazy scribble that doesn't look like anything. But we're jumping the fence, and we're feeling it and reporting on that sensation in this line on the paper. And I might do more than one gesture to try to understand a little better. Then I'll look for the one that seems to convey the most truth, and I'll erase it, or erase most of it anyway. Leave just a few lines, faint lines peeking out, and shift to a whole different kind of drawing. I'll study the reference once more, and now trace the contour. I'm slowing way down, shifting gears, tracing the outer edge, which is not easy with this image because it's the resolution on the video is poor. There is not a distinct edge. I'm sort of making it up, but I'm following carefully as best I can the outer contour and feeling it as I'm drawing, as if I'm touching, as if my fingers running along the outline of these life forms here. It's really better to have more than one reference to rely on, so you have lots of information and try to take a little something from all of it. But in this case, we just have the freeze frame with the poor image quality, poor line resolution. But I don't want that much detail. I'm still going to paint over it. This is still just a blueprint for a painting, and I can put my embellishments in later. I'm still not worried what the drawing looks like because I can always go back and make refinements, though I may not need to. So everything in the physical world around you has gesture, and it's your job as an artist to find it, see it, capture it. You can't find a good illustration or good piece of fine art without noticing the gesture in it. Here's my effort to scribble the gesture that lay under Daumier's beautiful drawing. Here's another Daumier piece where we can certainly feel the gesture of these three figures almost together as one form, their weight being thrown back. I'm trying to capture that here with my little gesture scribble, but I didn't quite get it. There's no wrong answers in gesture. These are your efforts to come to grips with the movement, the inner energy of the subject you're drawing, or subjects. In this sketch by Daumier, it's almost a gesture scribble all by itself. You feel those animals moving. I'm going to do another drawing here. I've got a lot of reference around me now. I had the references to rely on, but here I'm just doing that quick gesture scribble, trying to convey all of it, the whole sense of the scene in one quick line, 20-30 seconds, no more than that. And then I go to my reference and carefully follow the outlines, the contours, to put the edge detail in for these forms. And then I can go in and shade it to create a value pattern of darks and lights that I know I'll be needing for my painting. The key is always the gesture that underlies. There's my attempt to catch the gesture in Goya's picture. But you know, even in the contour outline drawing phase of this exercise, I don't want to do a lot of detail in this drawing in the contour either, because I'll be painting this and I can put in embellishments if I want later in the painting. So what you're doing in the contour part, even though you're slowing down to do it, is just an outline, a simple outline. We're being very, very surface here, so I wanted to make that clear. Two different kinds of drawing in tackling this subject, and both in just a matter of minutes. I was trying to interpret and capture a gesture that might have been beneath the painting. Of course, I've got it all wrong. Look how my ballerinas are dancing straight up and down, where Degas really has them at a tilt, off their centers of balance, much more like dancers would be. But there are no wrong answers in gesture. That phase of the drawing is just you coming to grips with the movement and space of your subject. It's just your exploration. Okay, this idea of gesture, this line of energy and direction through space, is a way nature expresses itself. And you see it all around you, everywhere you look, of course. and landscapes, and clouds, crowds, architecture, furniture. You even see it when people are talking to each other. And it doesn't matter if you're drawing from a live model or a photo reference or from out of your head, or you're drawing an animal, vegetable, or mineral. The rules are the same. Feel the subject doing and you'll see it better. It almost gives you a second sight. When you try one, I recommend you start by drawing the box that frames your scene, like you see Goya doing here. And then you scribble inside with this one line to convey the whole scene that's being framed. And don't overthink this. Don't take more than 10 or 20 seconds with it. There's my scribble of Goya. Of course, it's easy since he's done all the work for me in his drawing. But while you're scribbling your subject and your gesture, ask yourself about it. Is it moving? Or is it resting? Or is it all coiled up, all poised to move? Are there outside forces acting on it? For example, is gravity pulling it down? And feel that motion in your own muscles, the stretch or the reach or the recoiling. And also try to imagine the tension that came just before the action you see. It's part of the gesture too. Here's this fine quote by Kimon Nicolaides. He says, "You must also seek to understand the impulse that exists inside the model and causes the pose which you see. The drawing starts with the impulse, not the position. The thing that makes you draw is the thing that makes the model take the position." So you're almost one step ahead of the subject. And that's what you draw on the page with your pencil, not the likeness. Your scribble isn't about what the subject looks like, rather what it's doing and feeling. And if there's a single moment of truth in your picture, this is it. This humble scribble. Those are my ballet dancers. Our job as artists is to find the gesture behind surfaces. That means to probe a little beyond the obvious and look for the squiggle within and draw from that sensation. Feel the impulse of it. Trace the movement in the air with your hand. Draw that. This interpretation you do of your subject's movement in a three-dimensional space will free you up. Gesture holds our figures and scenes together, and it's a surefire way to begin our drawings. These concepts of gesture and contour drawings were first expressed in a systematic way by artist and sculptor Kimon Nicolaides, who taught figure drawing classes in New York. He pioneered some exciting new methods for drawing and rendering form in 2D and 3D, and he came up with several of these ideas during World War I, when he served as an army cartographer making aerial contour maps of battlefields. After he died in 1941, a book came out based on his notes and teachings and attributed to him as the author, called The Natural Way to Draw. You might have heard of it, and you might even have a copy on your bookshelf. It's still in print, and it's even used as a text in some college art programs. But the book is not that well understood, and it's often misinterpreted. Much of the book is devoted to gesture drawing, which we've talked about, but the other big idea in the book is contour drawing, and this is a kind of drawing used in map making, coincidentally enough, or maybe not so coincidentally. Contour traces the edges or the outline of a form, and it's a way of observing and drawing something from the outside in. When we do a contour, we slow way down. We focus all our attention on the outer edge, outer surface of the subject we're drawing. We're feeling the subject just like we did with gesture, but in a different way. Now we're just feeling the topography. We're not concerned with the inner force or the inner movement like we were with the gesture, the impulse. Instead, we're turning our pencil into a bug, crawling ever so slowly and painstakingly down the silhouette edge of the model. And again, as with gesture, we're not going to worry about what the final drawing looks like. Drawing this way, the outline gradually appears, but not as the result of our thinking or predetermination or formula for what the drawing should be, rather just from blindly, slowly following the edge, like the ladybug. So unlike gesture, which is fast and assumes the impulse and takes in everything at once, contour encompasses the whole form slowly, one bug step at a time. The ladybug can't see but a few nanometers ahead of her, but as she creeps along, the total big picture begins to show itself on its own. without our idea or will for the drawing imposing. In blind contour, you're not even looking at your drawing as you draw. Rather, you're riveted on the bug's journey on the outer edge of the form. One way students practice this is to draw their own hands very carefully, looking at their hand and not looking at their drawing. And again, following the outline, the contour, every little bump and wrinkle and hair follicle. In Nicolaides' classes, he would have the students erase the early gesture sketch, the line scribble he'd always have them do first, to push it back into the background of the picture, and then draw right over it, carefully tracing the contour. Nicolaides would always say, it's not the drawing that's important, rather it's your experience of doing the drawing with contour. Dr. Betty Edwards suggests experience is the brain shifting to its other hemisphere that's sensitive to pattern recognition and fitting pieces together, not the part of the brain that interprets symbols. And if you draw this way, if you're blindly following the contour, the subject is going to start to draw itself. And it doesn't matter if you're looking at your paper or not, or if you're drawing the shape of the object itself or the negative shape of the spaces around it or next to it, or if you're drawing a picture that's upside down, the right side of your brain will be fitting those pieces together. It's finding and fitting the patterns together without the help of your symbol processing other brain. This whole other mysterious part of your brain is doing this work, and that was the experience Nicolaides may have been referring to. It amounts to kind of an inner seeing, and the inner seeing and the outer seeing reinforce each other. And Betty Edwards expressed this very well in her book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. So we're drawing this figure sideways because, well, I'm overwhelmed by the complexity of all the white configurations in here. My brain can't make sense of it. So we're turning him sideways and we're just focusing on the contours of these shapes and their relationships with each other and nothing more. We don't care who this person is or if he's even a person. And then when we're done, we turn the drawing upright and the face pops out because we've been very careful about the shapes without ascribing any meaning or association to them. Betty Edwards would have her students drawing pictures upside down or drawing the negative spaces around and between objects to make the form, the positive form, pop out. And this was her way of shifting their perceptions over to this new way of seeing in this supposed right hemisphere of the brain that does all this processing of pattern and pattern interrelationships and disengages from all the associative thinking that goes on with looking at people around us. It was the same sort of perceptual shift that Nicolaides was talking about. He wanted the students to have an experience when they were doing a contour drawing that was hard to describe, but it was just about going into this right brain place. Now here I'm trying to draw this metal folding chair, and I'm just focusing on the negative space, the empty spaces in between, and their angles and their proportions and relationships. And when I'm done, the form of the folding chair, silhouette of it, pops out pretty accurately. But I wasn't thinking about chair. Here the contour of the negative space between these two face profiles to get the form. And if I'd been focusing on the actual contour of the actual faces, I would have been worried about, am I getting the face right? Am I doing this right? Am I getting the proportions right? My logical brain would have interfered with the whole process every step of the way. So this is a magic way to draw, but it's best if you start out with the gesture of drawing first. And that way you have that inner dynamic down. You've the wire frame that holds it all together. So you have to feel that impulse first, that essential movement. That's a whole nother kind of perceptual shift and experience. And by doing the gesture first, you'll have the linchpin of the sketch. and then you can go ahead and do your contour. With contour drawing alone, you may accidentally capture the gesture, or it may capture itself in the edge drawing, but you've not fully participated in that with your own body and your conscious empathy with the subject. So gesture and contour are both feeling kinds of drawings, and theoretically you could do them both with a blindfold on. For example, if someone told you what the subject was in the room that you were going to draw, from their description you might be able to take the form of the subject in your own body, feel it in your imagination and muscles, and recreate the gesture of that pretty well. And then, and we're presuming this is not a live model, we'll say it's a piece of statuary or still life, elements in a still life. As a real object in the room, you could go over and feel the contour of it, the outline, with your hands literally, and draw the contour still with that blindfold on, and have a valid drawing, because these are both tactile or experiential feeling approaches to recreating form. Now, these two kinds of radical different kinds of drawing are not to be substituted for learning about the figure and artistic anatomy and how light and shadow play on three-dimensional form, because that's all part of how artists see the world around them with lights and darks and line. That's the language of drawing and painting. So you want to study the art, go to the museums, go to the life drawing classes. But if you get stuck, you always have your gesture and contour to fall back on. So do your studies, don't neglect your art education, but practice your gesture and contour drawing for a few minutes every day. These are muscles that get better and stronger the more you use them, and they'll be a very sound part of your art education. And for troubleshooting, you can't beat them. If you're drawing something complex and it's confusing you and your eyes are glazing over from looking, just take a breath, step back, make a few gesture scribbles of it. Then erase back those lines and do a slow contour or edge study. So take the two-punch approach of gesture and contour. Jab with your left fist and come at it with the right hook. That would be the contour study. You'll get your questions answered and you'll nail it. So gesture and contour are great for understanding and copying form, but an illustrator can also use them to imagine and create scenes, to make up drama out of thin air, to compose a story scene. Just plunge right into doing a gesture scribble of it, even if you're not quite sure what the scene will be about yet. And this is how you pull a picture out of yourself. Painters have always made thumbnail sketches to determine how the light is falling on a scene they want to render, what the main shape elements and value pattern and the color notes will be for their painting. So they do these mini sketches for each of these issues to work things out for their picture, and then they slam dunk their larger painting. Well, you can put your gesture studies into these frames. Let's call them gesture thumbnails. First draw your frame or your format, then scribble inside with one line whatever comes to you, and don't stop to research or copy anything. And try to be all the characters and the setting too all at once, and feel what they might be feeling. Actually feel it in your muscles, then draw your sensations. Map out all this emotional and visceral geography on your sheet in one quick squiggle. Dash it down, and you'll have the structure and heart of your final picture right there staring back at you after only a few seconds of doodling. When you do this, you'll find that you've also focused your mind in an instant. You've also established the movements and poses and angles of your characters. You've set the stage and the vantage point from where your viewers will be watching your scene unfold. You've narrowed your visual reference search and saved yourself a ton of time hunting for picture reference you don't really need. You've divided your picture space and evoked the underlying grid that determines your design. You've related your subject and other elements to your picture's negative or empty space and the four edges of its frame. All of this will have happened just like that. Your inner artist does it all for you. Yes, it's mysterious. When you've done your little gesture thumbnail, you'll know exactly what kinds of references to hunt for or create. Your scribble may not look like anything to anyone else. Its meaning might be zipped up in that tiny glyph, and you may have to tease it out when you work up your full sketch. That's when you hunt for your reference, for your outlines, your edge details, because you know precisely what to look for. You'll have your camera probably, and you've got the internet and YouTube and props around your house and library branches maybe all over town. So you go on a scavenger hunt for this specific reference. Then you can work out your careful contour or edge study of your drawing, and you know exactly where you're going. Trust your scribbles. Your gestures are the seeds of your final art. Your picture is born in just those few seconds. And when you're doing a gesture thumbnail, you may not feel like you're working at all, but you are. Once you get used to this, the process might feel so easy and pain-free that you'll be suspicious. It might not even feel real to you because you're not struggling. In fact, it will be the most real part of creating your illustrations for your story.